Introduction to I/O Psychology Part 2. Industrial Organization Psychology. Considerations in conducting research. Ideas, hypotheses, and theories. The first step in conducting research is 1. Decide what to research. Many research ideas stem from a person starting a sentence with I wonder. For example, JYP, a manager, might say, I wonder why some of my employees can't get to work on time. An employee might say, I wonder I could perform well if I have my own computer. A supervisor might say, I wonder which of my employees is the best to promote. All three examples seem to be ordinary questions, but each is just as valid and important in research as those asked by your professors. Thus, everyone is researcher at heart. 2. Hypothesis. Once question has been asked, the next step is to form a hypothesis, an educated prediction about the answer to a question. This prediction is usually based on a theory, previous research, or logic. Literature reviews. Once a research idea has been created, the next step is to look for related literature. It is important because if the question you are interested in answering has already been researched in 20 studies, it is probably not necessary for you to conduct a new study. Journals can be difficult to read and boring, but are the best source of unbiased and accurate information about a topic. For an example of an updated journal, bridge publications are designed to bridge the gap between the academia and applied world. Articles in this publication are usually written by professors about topic of interest to practitioners, but they are not as formal or statistically complex as articles in journals. If you wish to see an example of an article in Bridge Publications Trade magazines, contains articles usually written by professional writers who have developed expertise in a given field. The main audience for trade magazines is the practitioners in the field. Trade magazines present the research on a topic in an easy-to-understand format and pleasing images. However, the articles in this publication do not cover all the research on a topic and can be somewhat biased. For an example of HR magazine, Internet and the increasingly source of information is the Internet. As most of you have already discovered, the Internet contains a wealth of information on just about every topic. Just like What Have Nano from the Type series A Girl from Nowhere said, and I quote, if you to be genius, press Ctrl-C and Ctrl-V. As useful as the Internet is, a word of caution is in order. A problem with relying on secondary sources such as the Internet is that one cannot be sure if the information in a secondary source accurately reflects the information in the primary source. In the field of psychology, two excellent examples of this lack of accuracy are the use of the Little Albert story to demonstrate the role of classical conditioning in learning phobias, and the use of Kitty Genevieve's story to demonstrate the lack of bystander intervention. The location of the study. Once a research idea has been created and a hypothesis formed, you must decide whether to conduct the study in the laboratory or in the field. Laboratory research. When you hear the word research and laboratory, the first thing that comes to your mind might be, is an experimenter in a white coat running subjects with some chemicals. Few experimenters wear white coats, but 32% of I/O psychology research is conducted in a laboratory. Rock, 2008. Usually, this is done at a university, but some are conducted in organizations. One disadvantage of laboratory research is external validity or generalizability of results to organizations in the real world. The problem here is the situation similar enough to actual employment decisions made in the real world, or is the laboratory environment so controlled and hypothetical that the results will not generalize? Research is often conducted in Laboratories, because researchers can control many variables that are not necessary in the study. Field research. Another location for research is away from the laboratory and out in the field, which could be the assembly line of an automotive plant, the secretarial pool of a large insurance company, or the interviewing room at a personnel agency. What field research obviously gains in external validity, it loses in control of extraneous variables that are not interest to the researcher. Internal validity. Does the location of a study make a difference? It can. A meta-analysis by Reichard and Avolio 2005 found that leadership training was more effective in laboratory studies than in field studies. Field research also provides researchers with an ethical dilemma. Psychologists require that subjects participate in studies of their own free will, and I know you are more familiar with it in the concept of informed consent. In laboratory studies, informed consent is seldom an issue because potential subjects are told the nature and purpose of a study, their right to decline participation or withdraw from participation, the risks and benefits of participating, limits of confidentiality, and whom they can contact. Questions. However, obtaining informed consent can not only be difficult, but change the way people behave. The research method to be used. After deciding your location for your research, the researcher must determine which type of research method to use. The Quickie includes experiments, quasi-experiment, archival, research observations, surveys, and meta-analyses. Experiments. As you might recall from your Introduction to Psychology course or previous psychology subjects, the experimental method is the most powerful of all research methods because it is the only one that can determine cause-effect relationships. If you want to know whether one variable produces or causes another variable to change, the experiment method is the only method that should be used. Two characteristics define an experiment. 1. Manipulation of one or more dependent variables. 2. Random assignment of subjects to experimental and control conditions. If either of these characteristics is missing, a research project cannot be called an experiment. Instead, it is called a quasi-experiment, a study, a survey, or an investigation. Independent variable are the manipulated variable in the experiments. Accountable for change. Independent variable. Dependent variable measures the change that occur as a result of that manipulation. It is expected to change as a result. Offranges in the independent variable. Experimental group. In an experiment, the group of subjects that receives the experimental treatment of interest to the experimenter. Control group. A group of subjects who do not receive a particular type of training so that their performance can be compared with that of subjects who receive training. Quasi-experiments. Even though researchers prefer to use experiments, it is not always possible. Quasi-experiments are then used. Quasi-experiments are often used to evaluate the results of a new program implemented by an organization. In quasi-experiments, the experimenter either does not manipulate the independent variable or in which subjects are not randomly assigned to conditions. Quasi-experiments are employed when the researcher is interested in independent variables that cannot be randomly assigned. Usually this happens, which subjects are not randomly assigned to conditions. Quasi-experiments are employed when the researcher is interested in independent variables that cannot be randomly assigned. Usually this happens when the independent variable in question is something that is an innate characteristic of subjects are not randomly assigned to conditions. Quasi-experiments are employed when the researcher is interested in independent variables that cannot be randomly assigned. Usually this happens when the independent variable in question is something. That is an innate characteristic of the participants involved. Archival research. Another research method that is commonly used in IO psychology archival research. It involves using previously collected data or records to answer a research question, survey. Another method of conducting research is to ask people their opinion on some topic. Surveys might ask employees about their attitudes toward the organization, HR directors about their opinions regarding the best recruitment method, or managers about the success of their child care centers. Well, I designed survey questions are easy to understand. Use simple language, do not ask about hypothetical situations, and are relatively short in length. Care must be taken in choosing the words used in each question. Meta-analysis. Meta-analysis is a statistical method of reaching conclusions based on previous research. With meta-analysis, the researcher goes through each article, determines the effect size for each article, and then finds statistical average of effect sizes across all articles. A meta-analysis results in one number called the mean effect size, which indicates the effectiveness of some variable. Correlation coefficient are used as the effect size when researchers are interested in the relationship between two variables, and the majority of studies use correlation as their statistical test. It indicates the magnitude and direction of relationship. Difference score is used as the effect size when researchers are looking at the difference between two groups. It is a type of effect size used in meta-analysis that is signified by the letter D and indicates how many standard deviations separate the mean score for the experimental group from the control group. Subject samples. Decisions also must be regarding the size, composition, and method of selecting the subjects who will serve as the sample in a study. Although it is nice to have a large sample for any research study, a large sample size is not necessary if the experimenter can choose a random sample and control for many of the extraneous variables. A final important issue concerns the methods used to recruit subjects. To obtain the best research results, it is essential to use a random sample so that the sample will be as representative as possible. Because obtaining random samples is very difficult, especially in industry. Many studies use a convenience sample and then randomly assign to a particular experimental condition. If random assignment is a better method than non-random assignment, why would a researcher not randomly assign participants? It is usually because of limitations placed on the researcher running the study. When all of these decisions have been made, it is finally time to run the study and collect data. To ensure that data are collected in an unbiased fashion, it is important that instructions should be in standardized manner and in an understandable level. After the subjects are finished with their participation, they should be debriefed or told the purpose of the experiment and be given a chance to ask questions regarding their participation. Statistical analysis. After all data have been collected, the results are statistically analyzed. Statistical analysis helps us determine how confident we are that our results are real and did not occur by chance alone. In psychology, we use the 0.05 level of significance. If our analysis indicates that the probability that our data resulted from chance is 5% or less, we consider our results to be statistically significant. Although the 0.05 level of significance is the most commonly used, some researchers have suggested that we should be more flexible and use either more conservative or liberal levels depending upon the situation. To determine the strength of a finding, we use the effect size discussed earlier in the section on meta-analysis. Significance. Levels tell us the statistical significance of a study, and effect sizes combined with logic tell us the practical significance of a study. Correlation. It is necessary to discuss one particular statistic, a correlation, because it is so widely used in IO psychology and throughout this book. Correlation, once again, is a statistical procedure that enables a researcher to determine the relationship between two variables. Why does a correlation coefficient does not indicate a cause-effect relationship? Because a third variable, intervening variable, often accounts for the relationship between two variables. Suppose that there is a correlation of plus 80 between the number of Blackpink albums sold in Korea during May and the number of albums sold by Ben and Ben during that month in Philippines. Does listening to Blackpink cause the popularity of Ben and Ben in the Philippines? Of course, that would make no sense. Instead, we look for the third variable that would explain our high correlation. In this case, the answer is clearly the power and weight of music itself on each country. The result of correlational analysis is called as correlational coefficient, which was briefly discussed on the previous topics. The values of this coefficients range from 1 to +1. The further the coefficient is from 0, the greater the relationship between two variables. With that, we can say that a correlation of 40 shows a stronger relationship between two variables than a correlation of 0.20. Likewise, a correlation of 0.39 shows a stronger relationship than a correlation of +0.30. The plus and a signs indicate the direction of the correlation. A plus correlation means that as one variable increases, the other variable increases, whereas in negative correlation, when the value of one variable increases, the value of other variable decreases. Ethics in industrial organizational psychology. Organizations and employees are faced with ethical dilemmas every day. What is an ethical dilemma? Ethical dilemmas are ambiguous situations that require a personal judgment of what is right or wrong because there are no rules, policies, or laws guiding such decisions. Individuals often rely on their morals and personal values, which often leads to different decisions by different people in similar situations. People have different backgrounds that impact their personal values and how they define a particular situation, and the decision one person makes may be very different than what another one makes.